So, the New York Yankees lose out on Juan Soto as he stays in New York, but instead heads over to the Mets. It's a 15-year deal worth a lot of money. $765 million. Good Lord. I didn't think this would happen. I genuinely believed that Juan Soto was going to stay in New York and he was going to be a member of the New York Yankees because it fit, right? Like he had proof of concept. It worked very well for them. They make it to within a couple of games and probably a couple fielding gaffes of the World Series, of a World Series championship. Like they were in the World Series against the Dodgers there. He obviously had a phenomenal season out in New York. We all went over why it made so much sense him playing in New York, and with the Yankees at Yankee Stadium because of the ballpark dimensions and everything like that. Like it all, legacy-wise, every little bit of it lined up with Juan Soto going to the Yankees. And then in the end, Steve Cohen did what he said he was going to do. He was going to go out there, he was going to flex his financial might, and he was going to be the one who was going to bring Juan Soto to, or not just Juan Soto, but bring superstars and bring that Dodgers-like quality to the New York Mets. And he has done it now. It is unbelievable that this is happening. And there's just so many different ways to go about looking at this particular thing. Let's start on the Juan Soto aspect of it, because obviously when this happens, social media reactions flying off the handles, right? People burning jerseys, which, I mean, yeah, that's devastating, I'm sure. But there's just so much to really dive into with this. For Juan Soto, it kind of drives home. Like he was going to go to the highest bidder, and the Mets were that. And that was what this whole thing kind of came down to. And that's why some people were kind of talking about the Blue Jays as the ones who could get it, because they were going to go to $700 million. And that was apparently about 10% short of what they needed to get to. And we'll get to Toronto here in just a second. But for Juan Soto, this is now an opportunity. And one of the things I saw last night is, oh, this guy just didn't care about his legacy. It's like, no, the legacy he cares about is that his great grandchildren are going to be living in a mansion on Mars because this guy has been making all this money for 15 years and all the opt-outs and everything like that. But that this guy is like the legacy that he is going to leave behind is one of absurd amounts of generational wealth. That's what he cares about. And also, I think if we want to look at a baseball legacy here, the guy won a World Series with the Washington Nationals when no one thought that was, like, they came out of nowhere. And then he does that and goes to the Padres. Like, he hasn't taken the conventional route in any of this. So why did we think that the conventional legacy part of it, where he would need to set that legacy with this one team, would be anything to him? Also, he's got 15 years now to figure out that course of action. You know, like Gary Carter said a pretty good one with the Mets. Sorry, Expos fans. You know, like Carlos Beltran had that tarnished a touch. But like you can set a legacy with teams that aren't the Yankees or the Dodgers or the Red Sox. You can do it very easily with the Mets, and he's going to have 15 years to do that. And so, like, for him, that this is it's a real statement. And now I don't think this guy feels much in terms of pressure. He obviously handled it very well in New York when it was kind of solely placed on him to try to go out and win a World Series for a Yankees team that hadn't even been there in 15 years, which for them is basically a Cubsian drought. And so now he is going to be kind of tasked with being this superstar that brings all this attention to the Mets. And we have seen attempts like this by, with all due respect to the Mets, and I've always kind of liked the Mets. You know, I've always had a bit of a soft spot for the Mets, but we have seen a number of times the younger brother or the second fiddle team, to be a bit more harsh about it, try to go out and make these types of big moves, and it doesn't really work, right? Like the Clippers tried to do it with Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, and tried to do all that, right? Like, the Mets have tried this before, and look, like the Mets have had some success, right? But they have tried to make the big splashes and do all this, right? The Brooklyn Nets, trying to do that with Kevin Durant and everything, and a lot of times it doesn't really work. But I do think that Cohen is going about this in a smart way as we kind of transition now to what this means for the Mets. Like, he has always kind of said he wants to be the Dodgers of Major League Baseball, and I think a lot of people just assume, oh, that means he wants to buy a championship, and it's like, well. Yes, but I do think he wants to be at least remotely smart about it, right? And that's why when it wasn't working a couple years ago, it's like, yeah, trade everything. What do we care? Retain all of the salary. We can do that. And you can get a couple of other prospects, and you get an Acuna and stuff like that. Not that one, but the other one. You can use that financial muscle to benefit you when it comes to prospects now too. And so they don't have the same kind of pipeline that the Dodgers have, where it's just one guy goes out and says, okay, well, now there's this other top prospect who's going to hit 35 home runs. No, you've never heard of him, but he's going to come up and he's going to have some big hits in World Series games and stuff like that. That is more the Dodger method. And so the Mets want to try to do that. And when you look at the projected lineup for this team, there are a few young pieces in it that you think can contribute right away. So they have obviously jumped the line a little bit now with Juan Soto. It is going to be up to them now to fill around this. And this is why one of the reasons why I ultimately think Soto goes to the Mets is the Mets can do this and then keep going. Right? Like, that's what it was with the Dodgers, right? It wasn't just, okay, we got Ohtani, great, off we go. Because the Blue Jays could have done that, but what are you going to do around it now? And I think that is where some of the criticism of the Yankees may be a little bit more valid, because they can go out and spend on Juan Soto. They tried. They gave it all they could. They didn't cheap out on the Juan Soto part of it at all. But the Mets now, like, if they sign Pete Alonso tomorrow, are we going to be surprised? No, we're going to laugh about it. We're going to make some jokes about it. But this is a team that's going to keep spending and going to keep trying to get better. I have a feeling that the Yankees would go out and get Juan Soto and be like, well, fuck, what do we do now? We're kind of stuck here, and try to nibble at some of the edges the way that they have been doing for a long time. And so for the Mets now, this is the big piece, but it cannot be the only piece. There has to be some other parts around it now. I would say specifically in the starting rotation that you need to build around it with. And I think they will do that. They already went out and acquired Clay Holmes, and apparently the thought is he's going to be in the starting rotation. So they are going to need to add a few more pieces around this. Does this make them the favorites in the National League? I would still say no. I think it makes them probably the best team in the National League East. But I think that there's going to be some adjustments now to be made to get this team into that Dodgers category. On the Yankee side of things, I would anticipate a free agent spending spree that kind of mimics that of a drunken sailor. For those watching out of market, I was on Sportsnet 960 The Fan this week and chatting with Adnan Virk about it, and I said, like, from a Blue Jay standpoint, one of the things I worry about is all these free agents that the Jays are in, like an in-person meeting with Corbin Burns, going after Anthony Santander, looking at Max Fried, like they're doing all of these things. The Yankees now become the favorites to get all of them, because they just okayed spending $750 million over the next 16 years. I think are fine divvying that up, because Juan Soto was not the only need that this team had. There are some holes that this team needs to plug. That offense in the World Series and in the playoffs, really, like it wasn't good enough. And part of, like, Glaber was actually doing okay, and he's probably gone. Soto was getting on base and table setting, but no one else was doing anything. Like, Rizzo is gone at first base. Chisholm is going to have one of second or third kind of locked down. You need the other one there. Outfield, like they have Dominguez. Outfield's probably okay, actually, with Judge, Dominguez, and Verdugo. They're probably all right there. But offensively, like, you need at least one more big bat in this offense, and then a couple of infielders just to be able to field a professional baseball team. I think Volpe's fine at shortstop. I don't think that's going to be an area that they look to address. But this is a team that has some holes. The bullpen is simply not good enough. I think the starting rotation could probably use a bit of an upgrade as well, because there's a lot of people that you're relying on that you're not overly comfortable relying on. Juan Soto, I do think, kind of masked a few things that the Yankees need. And I think that this understanding that they need to spend money now is going to lead to, I think, a very aggressive approach in free agency and kind of get back to what we are used to with the New York Yankees, where they are comfortable spending and spending and spending and spending and spending and going off after that. And so I think that this is going to be a team now that is going to allocate, what would that would like $46 million a year they were going to spend on Juan Soto. I think they spread that over a couple of dudes now and fill a few of these holes on this roster. And I think we see a very aggressive approach here from the Yankees. I do have to comment on the Blue Jays. They are my favorite team. I make no bones about that on here. For Toronto, I don't think it was ever super serious that the Blue Jays were going to get him. And that was one that I was not allowing myself to really get into. The good thing about it is that it doesn't really seem like a whole lot of the market has shifted in this time. Like, you remember around the Ohtani thing, which a lot of those memories coming up in this last little bit. But the big one for the Jays was Candelario, and he had signed, and there was a couple other pitchers, I believe, that had signed, and now the Ohtani thing happens, and it's like, well, shit, there's no one else around. Free agency has basically not even started yet, and this move happens. And so I do think that there is a pivot for the Blue Jays, and a lot of people are going, okay, well, let's see what plan B was. And as I just stated, the Yankees were perfectly fine allocating a lot of money to try to make this team better. I think they're going to keep spending. I think the Red Sox have made it very clear that they are going to keep spending now in this market. And so I don't think plan B is going to be good enough for Toronto. I think there needs to be a plan C, and I think that C needs to be standing for creative. I think the Blue Jays are going to have to get a little bit creative to help out with the vast improvements that this ball club needs. I am not so confident now in a Max Fried or a Corbin Burns or a Anthony Santander going to the Blue Jays at this point. I think that there are going to need to be, whether it be trades or finding a few bargains, that this team is going to have to try to work with. And sometimes they've done well on that front, and sometimes they've done very, very poorly on that. And I think last year was a big case of that. But Juan Soto was not going to fix every issue that the Blue Jays had. He was barely going to fix one of them. But there are now a lot of very desperate teams, I think, entering the market that can match the Blue Jays' desperation and also match them in terms of what they can offer financially. And the Blue Jays are going to have to, I think, get very creative with it. The other aspect of it is I would be, unless it comes with an overpay, I would be stunned if the Blue Jays re-sign Vladimir Guerrero Jr. now. I think that this is going to be a player that sees what has happened in the last couple of free agencies and at least wants to test those waters out. And it leads to a lot of really interesting discussions, I think, around Toronto, with both Bo and Vladdy probably coming up in the next little while. What does this mean for the Blue Jays now? And what do you do if this season doesn't necessarily go the way that you want it to? I still think you have a very good chance of re-signing Vladimir Guerrero Jr. if this thing does go to free agency, although the last couple of seasons don't necessarily add to that all that much. But I do think that there is a real opportunity for the Blue Jays to re-sign him. I just think it's going to have to come at the winter meetings next year. And if this team is hovering around 500 and are 6 games out of a playoff spot right around the trade deadline, with that looming over, it's going to be it would take a lot of stones to not trade Vlad and try to get something back for him, and risk losing him in free agency for draft compensation or whatever that may be. So it would be, it's going to be, I think, a very tense little while here out in Toronto. And once again, I have stated before, and I will state again, I have exactly zero confidence in the people running this Blue Jays team right now. So that is the story from Major League Baseball.